Atheist Nomads, episode something.
Dun dun dun.
An interview with Kylie.
The podcast you're about to listen to includes cursing and talking about hoo-haws. Please be advised.
Welcome to another episode of Atheist Nomads. I am Dustin. Lauren is actually up and with us.
Hooray! Yay.
And our guest today is Kylie.
Hi.
So I said episode something because we don't know when this one is going up because I'm using this as the wildcard episode. So if Kylie is born early, Kylie's interview goes up next week. Different Kylie, same spelling.
Yes, the right way.
Because you convinced us 4th of July of that being the correct spelling. We were leaning towards
Double E.
You convinced us. But yeah, and then if the baby is born on time and we can record an episode next week, then this is going up in January at some point when I take a break because of exhaustion or spending time with baby Kylie. So anyway, let's go ahead and get the sponsor message. Atheist Nomads is proudly brought to you by Archway Hosting. Check out their low-price, full-featured hosting solutions at archwayhosting.com. That's ARCHWAY hosting.com. We're also brought to you by listeners just like you. You can find out how you can become a patron at patreon.com/atheistnomads. That's patreon.com/atheistnomads. Kylie, welcome.
Thank you.
We've interacted socially a few times. Mm-hmm. I have actually mentioned you on the show, apologizing to you for not recognizing you after you'd gotten quite the haircut.
Oh, right. Yeah. There was a bit of a change. I get it. I still see people in where I live in Ontario that, like, I'm used to it now, but then they see me and, like, they're like, oh, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I do look different from, 5-6 years ago. So, yeah. I forgot to tell my grandma about it before I got my hair cut like this. And she was like, wow, I like the color. So she was trying to be polite, but yeah.
All right, and so you grew up and still live in Ontario, Oregon. Mm-hmm. Not to be confused with Ontario, California, or Ontario, the province in Canada, even though it is named after the province in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you look like you belong in, I would say, Northwest Portland.
Yeah, that's cool. I like it.
Not Ontario.
No, yeah, I don't. At this point, I don't. I did for most of my life. I was very suburban housewife-ish, I think, looking. So it's a very recent thing I've gone through. I tell people I'm post-divorce midlife crisis right now, so I could look different, very different in a couple of years, probably, maybe.
Well, I think you look rad.
Thanks. I like it. I mean, I'm having fun. Probably, like, I didn't dress the way I wanted to when I was a kid, and I was a child of the 80s, which is why I dress like I'm from the 80s now.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, and for the description, skeleton shoes, skull sweater that is hanging from kind of almost fishnet, purple kind of mohawk, and stud bracelets and necklace.
Yeah.
Or is that's not a necklace, that'd be a collar.
Yeah, like a choker kind of thing. Yeah.
Excuse me, choker.
Yeah, collar is a different context.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, usually it's either this or like neon. I do a lot of neon. That's a lot of times to annoy my 14-year-old because she doesn't like it. And I also have like a neon yellow sweater that says fresh on it.
Oh, that is so
that she hates.
Awesome.
Did
you get that at a thrift store?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I get all my clothes at thrift stores. But yeah, but I like to pick her up from school with that. And she's just rolls her eyes. But yeah.
Oh, the neon colors was crazy. It was my niece Alicia, who's been on the show. When she was about 12, she went through a scene phase, which I don't know if many people are aware. Scene.
Okay.
This was at least a thing among preteens in the Seattle metropolitan, actually, let's say suburban Seattle area at the time. And it was basically goth with color.
It was Hot Topic.
Oh, Hot Topic, yeah.
So a lot of black and a lot of neon and pastel colors.
Yeah, well, they have pastel goth. I've heard of that before, which is kind of cool.
They were calling it scene then, or at least she was. And oh man, I'd call her emo, and she's like, I'm not emo, I'm seen.
Oh yeah. There's within the subcultures like emo and goth, and then there's different types of goth. Like you get in there and you can offend some people if you're not. Yeah.
Well, and then there's even punk not too far away from that, and there's this.
And then true Seattle punk,
yeah,
which gets insulted by all the other punk.
And then there's hipster, and then there's real hipster, and then there's the anti-hipster hipsters, and there's like. You could almost fit them on a continuum, except none of it makes sense because they're all over the place.
Yeah.
And I have probably offended 20 people just now.
Well, I always get the thing, like, because my hair being in the mohawk, like, people assume they're like, oh, you like this and this and this band. And like I do, but I was repressed as a kid and I only got to listen to certain things. So I'm like, I feel like I would have totally been into them, but I didn't get to. So and then I feel like I'm a poser because I don't really know. I have a shirt that is like the Ramones or whatever. They're like, and one of my friends was like, do you know any songs by the Ramones except for I Want to Be Sedated? I'm like, no, don't hate on me. Come on.
Oh, it's like high school all over again.
Yeah. I'm a poser, but no.
And I do feel kind of bad that the studio headphones are totally crushing the mohawk.
I know, that's what I said when I put it on. I was like, this is not, I'm going to have to go put more gel in it when I leave.
I think it looks kind of cool, like a camel.
Yeah, could be a double hawk, a bihawk.
Bihawk. So hot right now. Bihawks.
What was it like growing up in Ontario? And you're growing up in Ontario.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I was born in 81. So, and I mean, I would say like pretty middle class. Like not like, you know, my parents were. Now I realize that they probably had more money than I realized, but they were very kind of like, what is the word?
Stingy?
Yeah, well, not stingy, but they were just very good stewards of their money, I guess, if you want to say. And then, you know, 10% of it went to the church, and
and also it's Ontario middle class, not real middle class.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, but so I used to get irritated when I was a kid that my mom would get stuff at the Salvation Army and all that, because when I was younger, that was not cool. Like their store stuff was not cool, but now it's awesome, and it is awesome. But you know, then I was embarrassed that I couldn't.
But it wasn't ironically awesome.
Yeah. You didn't do it, and then like be like, I'm doing this, and yeah, it wasn't cool then. It was just like you were doing it because you didn't have money, or you know. And so I was mad that I couldn't go to the mall and go to Eddie Bauer and spend $50 on a t-shirt and stuff like that. That made me mad.
And Ontario had a really wicked mall. I mean, seriously, it was awesome.
Which is now abandoned, basically. It is. Actually, somebody bought, and they're actually putting something in there for the last 10 years, maybe, because they had Emporium down at one end, and then, because there's the Albertsons right there, and then there's Emporium, and then they had a bunch of things in the mall, and then it's been empty except for it has a Sears down at one end, and the old people go in there to walk up and down.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's all it's
in the wintertime. It's a great walking
all it's
path.
Been used for the last like 10 years. Now because I think it was whoever owned it, like the amount of money they wanted for it, nobody was going to do it. And so it's just sat there. And
there was a JCPenney as well.
Yeah, JCPenney and Emporium and the Sears that has always been there. There was also like a Payless, Rite Aid kind of thing in there.
So it was a very typical 90s shopping mall. I
know all of my childhood clothes came from the Emporium, and all my shoes came from the Payless.
Yeah. And so it was, and they had like arcade game stuff, and
it's all about the arcade.
Yeah. and then
it wasn't Epic Arcade.
Yeah.
Okay, and I say Epic because I left when I was 8.
It's epic, man.
They had
3 games.
They had you remember the video game Altered Beast? Did you ever play that one? No. Okay. Or then like what was
that? Would have been satanic.
Well, it wasn't. It was at the 7-Eleven, so I got to play it. And they also had the one with the Need for Speed. Maybe it was when you'd be in the Mustang with the thing up, and then Double Dragon was also
Double Dragon.
Yeah. So those were not connected to the mall, but that was at the 7-Eleven. But but yeah, so I mean, it was pretty typical. I mean, I guess not typical for some people. The church that we went to was a non-denominational church that had been started by a guy in Ontario. I I think I was about 4 or 5 years old when we started going to the church, and it was still like a meeting in people's homes thing at that point. And then it went to a kind of a strip mall thing. I don't know when the last time you guys were in Ontario, so I don't know if you would even know.
At least drive through it.
Right.
Frequently.
Well, it's now where the Plaza Inn is now. It was in that strip mall. And we were there for a while, and then it got too big there. And then we had to meet in the Ontario High School in a auditorium for a while, which is not the auditorium anymore. They have a cafeteria. They took out the auditorium, which makes no sense. But and then eventually moved to a place. It was downtown or on the other side of Ontario that was a recreational center. So when we moved in there the first time that we had service at that church, we got to swim in the swimming pool, which was then bricked over, and then that was the sanctuary eventually. Okay. And so then we had like racquetball courts that they turned into. Some of them stayed racquetball courts, so you could go in there and yell and have it echo.
Best church ever,
right? And so you could do that, but then they would also they put some of the Sunday school rooms in there, but then it still echoed, which was like, this is not a great idea, but yeah. So
and what kind of church was this?
Non-denominational, and it's like,
which that doesn't actually mean anything.
No, it doesn't. It just means
but for people who say that they belong to non-denominational, it does mean something.
Well, it means that like when people say things like, "Oh, I was," there's certain terms I know, but I'm like when people say like I'm Adventist or Baptist or
they don't follow a particular dogma.
I'm like, I don't know what that means. I don't know the differences.
Evangelical or Pentecostal? Do you speak in tongues or believe that once saved, always saved?
We did. No, I don't know that the once saved, always saved. We did.
Okay, so just Pentecostal.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. There you go.
I think that the last thing I heard was it was like the pastor that is the pastor now, who was the youth pastor when I was growing up. He kind of goes more towards a Foursquare theology, which that even to me, I have no idea what that means, but that's what I've heard. So
it is emergent church.
Oh, I don't know if he would do emergent church. Emergent church is
kind of.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's kind of. It was the emergent church of 20 years ago, right. And now it's getting a little bit more established. Right. And now there's the new emergent church.
Yeah, the new emergent church is a bad word for the most part. Like Rob Bell, I remember when he was doing the Numa videos before he got a little bit outside of things, we would watch those in like the women's group and whatever. And then they just disappeared, and nobody talked about Rob Bell anymore because he had done like the whole Love Wins book, and where he was kind of universalist and that like everybody's probably going to heaven, and then he supported gay marriage or whatever, and then everybody's like, nope, not talking about Rob anymore. Emergent church is kind of seen as like a gateway drug, I think, to atheism for the most part.
All right, that's fair.
Worked for you.
Yeah, so I mean, at the church that we went to, my mom was a children's pastor. And was for 10 years. And my dad was on the worship team, played the bass on the worship team. So we were at church 2-3 times a week at least. We'd go on Sunday morning and then be there. And then, of course, because my mom, they were working when they were there. And so then we didn't get to leave when service was over. We had to wait for them to talk to everybody. And I would go out and sit in the van, in the Aerostar minivan, and listen to Casey Kasem Top 40 while my parents were messing around inside, and then we would leave. And then Sunday night there was usually a service. I didn't always have to go to that one. Then Wednesdays we would be there for youth group and that kind of stuff. And then usually there was another night of the week that we would be there just with my parents doing
pretty typical of smaller churches, right? Where you get really heavily involved in everything.
Well, and because they create an atmosphere where all of your social needs are met in that, which I don't think they do it intentionally. It's like, we're going to make it so they have no contact outside of, but it just, I mean, it makes sense from like a marketing standpoint. You make this, and it's involved in everybody.
Even just a small community standpoint.
Yeah. And so everybody that you know is connected to the church in some way. And then your world is basically revolves around that. For the most part, honestly, the church that I grew up in and the people that were there, I don't have any complaints about. I mean, obviously, I don't believe the things that I was taught, and I believe there's a lot of harmful things, but I didn't have any like experiences of where people were using this to be abusive or they were being horrible people. I mean, people are hypocritical, but like especially the guy who was the youth pastor when I was growing up and is now the pastor there, and even the senior pastor and a lot of the people that were on the staff, like they're genuinely good people that were doing what they feel like was right. And I feel the same way about my parents. And now I don't believe that believe what they were doing was correct, and there's lots of harmful things, but I do feel like I don't have like really bad feelings about the church that I grew up in. A lot of it was pretty positive because there's a lot of the social stuff I got. I mean, youth group was where all my friends came from, and for the most part, it was fun. Like, church camps and missions trips, and all that. It was fun because you have the social thing. So, it wasn't all bad. It wasn't certainly not. There was not any of the, I just like overtly, abusive kind of stuff that happened. I mean, I didn't have any really horrible experiences myself. I don't know if other people did, but so it wasn't. And that's usually when I talk to people that when I say that I used to be a Christian, and they're like, automatically like, well, what happened to you? What a horrible experience did you have? And I'm like, I didn't. There wasn't one. I do feel like there's certain areas of my life that were very negatively affected. A lot, mostly for me, it's around like gender roles and like what I was told.
You weren't traumatized by anything.
No, I didn't. I wasn't abused by a priest. I wasn't like it, and I felt like my parents basically, it worked for them. It worked in the bubble that I lived in, which is probably why I didn't question things at all, because it worked. And like right. My parents have been married for forever, and we had a good home life, and my parents are awesome people, and I love my family. So I didn't have these examples of like, you're being told this, but everybody is not doing it, and they're still being shitty people. Like, so I didn't have that to like show me that this is not the way to do it. It seemed to work. So I was like, this is how it works. You just do this. And then it wasn't until I got, like I always had questions. I was always probably asking too many questions. And my youth pastor told me once, for some reason, it was always around sex. Like I had lots of questions about those things. Where are the lines of things? I was like, because I was like, when we're talking about like losing your virginity, because that becomes a big thing when you get in youth group. That's like, and because I was, the true love waits thing was that's what it was when I was in the 90s. It was, you get the purity ring and you sign the pledge, which I did all of those. And then, but there was part of me that was like, so when technically do you lose your virginity? Because there's all of these technicalities that I feel like you could, how do you know? So I was like, is it intercourse, like actual penetration, or is it if you have to have an orgasm? Because there's a lot of times when one person does not. So did one person lose their virginity, the other one doesn't, right?
It's a good question,
right? And so if you then you
could, like, that didn't count. I didn't come,
right? Exactly. And so that's why you end up having that like soaking thing, or maybe that's a Mormon thing, like where you can just
soaking and saddlebacking, and all that.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of dry humping that went on, and that was I always, in my mind, it was always like, if you don't have an orgasm, you're still a virgin. So you could do all that stuff. Some people, we didn't ever have the thing about like, you could do it in the butt and it didn't count. Like that was not even on my radar, which is, I don't know why.
That came later.
Yeah. So, but
phrasing,
huh?
Phrasing.
Right. But I mean, there was oral sex was kind of a gray area, like that you maybe could do that. But then I'm like, how would I lose my virginity if I was giving a guy a blowjob? That doesn't make sense, So that would be like, maybe he could lose his, and I don't know.
It'd be a succubus.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh man.
Yeah. And then it was always a gray area, like with like masturbation. That was a gray area. They were like, well, it is not a sin if you can do it without thinking about somebody else. And I'm like, okay, but that's kind of impossible. What do you think about when you're, I don't know. So
yeah,
Jesus,
right? Because it comes down to it's adultery if you are thinking impure thoughts about another person. That's the sin. Whatever you're doing with your hand is not the sin; it's the thoughts.
Because they would say that if you were a married person and you're like somehow separated from your spouse for a while, if you're jerking off to thinking about your spouse, that's not a sin. So that's how I guess they had to say, okay, but if you could do it without it, because it's a lusting after someone. That was the sin. So I thought maybe Jesus masturbated too, but he just didn't think about anybody. And that was he
was already top of the food chain. He was just like, I got this.
Or you could thinking about yourself. Maybe he was just like, I'm so amazing. I don't know. So there was those kind of questions I had, and my youth pastor told me once, like, basically I was trying to get all these specifics, and they're like, oh, you just asked too many questions. Like you need to just it's your heart is what matters. I'm like, that's not an answer.
Exactly. And nice vague answer.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's like, oh, God works in mysterious ways. We can't ever understand it. Yeah. And then there was a lot of the, like the mixed messages about girls being basically more responsible for things than guys were.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because guys, you can't really expect a guy to control himself. It's like they're just kind of so driven by visual stimulation, and so what do you expect from them? If girls are dressing like this, they're gonna stumble. And it's like there was no it wasn't like explicitly said that girls were responsible for it, but you knew. I mean, you are in a certain context or a community for long enough, and the undertones of what is actually being said is very clear.
And just look at modern public education, how girls are treated when they dress.
Oh yeah, still
you would get kicked out.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Well, and
it's just
in private schools, it's even worse. Like my principal at my Adventist junior academy, he got a graduation invitation from a former student who she included some pictures, and he was sitting there in class because he was also one of our teachers because it was a small school. Looking at the pictures, he was just like getting visibly angry.
Wow.
And somebody asked him, "What's wrong?" And he said, in every single one of these pictures, she's braless. And
how would you know
when
that?
a woman causes a man to commit adultery in her heart, she is responsible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at that exact moment, what went at least through my mind, and I know several others, what the fuck was going on in his office when she was yearbook editor 2 years ago?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And they spent hours alone together.
Yeah. Yeah.
What scares me about that particular reaction is the anger.
Yeah.
It's like he's like, how dare you make me lust after you?
Yeah. There's
that's on you, dude.
Well, and
I don't know if he was fucking her in his office or not, but
probably not, but
at least wanting to.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least wanting to.
And there was the I remember one youth trip we went to on a missions trip to Tijuana. For some reason, we went to Tijuana. I went to Tijuana 3 years. And then the year after I graduated, they went to like Brazil and then Northern Ireland. And I'm like, what the hell, dude?
That happens to so many people.
And I'm like, what? This is not cool. I didn't even get to go out of the country. And so
Tijuana's in a different country.
Well, I know off the continent, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
But like I would, Tijuana's not bad, but I went 3 years in a row, and yet we rode the bus all the way down there. Riding the bus with a bunch of church kids down there. Yeah, wow. You end up sleeping on the floor. The guys would pee in Mountain Dew bottles because they didn't want to stop again. It's not a fun experience.
Oh man, that's taking US 95 all the way down.
And so then when we would go across the border, they would tell the kids, like, do not say anything, even joking. Do not say that I've got something in the blah, blah, blah. And then there was always some kid that said something stupid. We didn't ever get stopped, but, and then when
because kids are stupid, right. And that's kind of funny.
It is. They think it's funny, and then it's like, oh, but you're going to go in the, but then when we go, like right before we went back home, we would go to shopping. You can get like the fake Oakleys and all that kind of stuff, and kids would buy switchblades and like M80s and stuff like that you're not supposed to bring over. And most of the time they got them because one of the kids, actually my little brother, cut a hole in the back of one of the bus seats and stuffed them in there, and so. So then that worked. But then when you're my older brother, which I don't know, it's my brothers that were doing this, but one of the girls that was like the most innocent looking blonde hair, blue eyed girl, she knew this. He put the M80s in her backpack when they were going across, and somehow they got in trouble and got caught and got a bunch of fines for it. But yeah, so
yeah, sorry guys, it's not the bad hombres we have to worry about. It's these youth church kids.
Right.
Yeah, it's youth groups.
Yeah. And then I just remember we had the M80s, and then like on July 4th we blew up milk cartons, and it was huge noises, and I don't know.
And those are seriously illegal in Oregon.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what
Oregon is strict enough that if you drop a sparkler, it's illegal.
Yeah. I
think a felony.
It's airborne.
It's airborne.
If you could throw anything in the air, and then you're in trouble.
If it explodes or it's on fire and in the air, it is illegal.
Wow.
I think technically at that point, dropping a cigarette butt would be illegal.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Which is why those people who set off all those fires this year are going to get hung.
Oh, yeah.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, we
lethal injection. Oregon does not do hanging.
Oh, sorry.
That's Washington.
Okay.
They still do hanging?
It's technically allowed, although Washington has done a moratorium on all executions.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Utah still does firing squad.
Really? What is like the one that has the least margin of error?
Hanging.
Hanging, probably.
It's down to a science at this point of there's an exact measurement and length to weight ratio to have exact snapping of the neck. I read an article when I was like 12 in Popular Mechanics on execution.
Yeah, I was talking about how all the questions that I had, like I asked like I really wanted to know, did Adam and Eve have belly buttons? That made no sense to me.
That is awesome.
And I was like, because did God put them there just so that, Cain and Abel wouldn't feel, yeah. And that one, and then other things, just questions like that it was kind of like, these things don't make sense, but it's kind of like you can ask questions, but then you realize when you start getting the looks of like, okay, this is enough. We're moving on to the next Bible story, But I did think it was funny that one of the kids that I grew up with was telling me, this is a while ago when I saw him, I hadn't seen him for quite a few years, that he was like, I remember when I met you that you were telling a Bible story or doing like trivia, Bible school or Sunday school trivia. And he said, and you kept saying the questions and you kept asking the questions about the genitals instead of the Gentiles. And I'm like, that sounds like me. That would be something I would do. And he's like, and everybody was laughing and I didn't get it, but I just pretended I knew it. I'm like, I would probably still make that joke at this point. So yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So
that's awesome.
But so I didn't, but other than like asking too many questions, I followed the rules. I didn't do anything bad really, which I regret now, but because I just had a very, like, I don't ever remember having a point where I thought maybe this isn't real. It was real. God was real. It was a fact. So I had always had like the big brother thing. Like I felt like anything I did, God would know, and then eventually it would come out. So I didn't, for the most part, do anything that was bad. And if I did, I would tell on myself. I would tell my parents. So, which then when I talked to my little brother, because he was like the black sheep of the family, like he, was like a pothead in high school and like would steal stuff. And I'm like, how did you do that? Growing up with the same ideas, like, because I would have been terrified to do that kind of thing. He said, well, when I was younger and I did it a couple times, and I realized that if nobody sees you, nobody knows about it. It's like it didn't happen. And I'm like, well, I guess I should have done that because I always thought that I would get caught, So I don't ever remember having a time when everybody has doubts or questions. But honestly, it was not until I think it was a combination of education, and then also just getting older and meeting more people outside of the bubble of Ontario and just the small area that I lived in, and seeing all these things that didn't line up at all. And you can only have so many of those things, and before you're like, okay, either you have to either reject all these other things, this other input you're getting, or you kind of have to start shifting how the other things that you've believed sit in your head. And I think that I've never been somebody, I've always been a people person. Like I've always, and my parents, I feel like, are that way too. Like they had their beliefs, their religious beliefs, but they never had those be more important than people. They were never the type of people that were like, oh, well, we're not going to give you money because you're homosexual or you're not doing, like they would take care of people, and they did. And that was their where they were at. So that was my example. And I couldn't, like, even when I kind of believed that homosexuality was wrong, if it was a sin, it was a sin. I didn't see it as something different at all. I'd never understood how someone would then use that to treat people horribly. Like, so like there was part of me that didn't ever buy into the judgmental, like, treating people like crap just because.
You were really lucky. But I also have a feeling that's what most people go through. Mm-hmm. And we only hear about the really traumatic, hateful stuff because, those are the people who want to share their story more. Oh yeah, well, and so there's the anger kind of about refreshing to hear somebody who's left a belief system who doesn't hold any grudges, right? who's just like, that was just the way things were. This is how things are now.
Right.
Still love it.
Well, and I feel like part of the thing is that because the response that I got when I left, which there was a lot of fallout, but not from, I never was worried that my parents would disown me or that I would lose my family. That because I always knew that my parents loved me and they would accept me no matter what. So that was, I think it was probably a lot easier for me to go out of it than most people. And so I think when people, I mean, I had an angry atheist phase for a while, but I've never been able to see religious people as all bad because I know people that I still love and respect, and like even my youth pastor, even though there's the stuff that I don't agree with, he was still a very big part of my childhood, and I respect him and love him, and talk to him every once in a while when I see him, and he always tells me and he's not like pushy about it, but he's always like, I'm praying for you, Kylie, and I'm like, okay, but he's like, this summer my dad had like heart issues to where it was like out of nowhere, and he was suddenly down in Utah for weeks, and we didn't know what was going to happen. Like, it was really serious, and the pastor, which my parents don't go to the church as much anymore, but he came over and he sat and talked with me. They gave us money for like, so there's just kind people. So it's like, it wasn't and I do feel like I'm lucky in that respect, because I do know that's not the experience for a lot of people. But I did go through losing basically my entire social circle when I left the church. And I also got divorced at the same time, which then lost. Yeah.
Double. And was that related?
Whammy. It was in some, I think part of the reason that I think they're connected in different ways. When I got married, I was 20 years old, and my ex was as well. And when we got married, we were, obviously of the same mindset. God is we grew up in the church together, and this is how we're going to raise our kids. We're going to be this kind of life, And so, well, I understood that, like, if you're going into it with that idea, then it seems kind of like a betrayal if the other person is like, nope, not doing that anymore. So I understood that, but it's also like people change, the divorce was more. There was, it was. My marriage was abusive. I was married almost 14 years, but it was abusive, like emotionally, verbally, for the most part, the whole time. But the last 5 years, there was started to be physical kind of stuff, and I feel like that was where some of the most destructive things came out of how I had been, the ingrained things that I had about marriages forever. You make it work no matter what. And because I always looked at people that got divorced as like, well, they just didn't try hard enough. They didn't do the things they needed to do. They weren't so committed. They just like were like, oh, they talk about that like
wishy-washy.
Yeah, or they talk about that like, oh, people are always bailing on their marriages when it's not fun anymore. That's kind of the thing that they give you. And so I had that idea, and I also had the all my examples in my family immediately, their marriages worked. So I felt like, why can't I do this? I remember my pastor didn't ever say. Actually, when I talked to him the first time about there being abuse, like, he told me, you need to call the police. To his credit, like, there was nothing about like that you need to stay in a physically abusive situation.
That's kudos.
Yeah,
that's big kudos.
And so I was never felt like that I was being told that. But there was always kind of this idea that I feel like he thought that if my ex-husband would just stop looking at porn and we would go to church more, it would be fixed. And I'm like, it's past that. It's not just
that's juvenile.
Yeah, exactly. And especially when, these are, there was some things that were not dealt with great, but it was also, I feel like it was because I also allowed myself to be told that, like, this is your role as a woman and as a wife. You do these things, and you need to let, the man is the head of the household. He's a spiritual leader. He's the blah, blah, blah. And even though my personality, that is not my personality to be, to be not like either, if not an equal, be like kind of like more of a decision maker driving in a relationship. And I think, honestly, if my ex and I had been able to be naturally fall, he would have been okay with me being the more kind of, because he was cool with that for the most part. But then sometimes he'd be like, oh wait, no, I need to exert my authority.
The social pressures came down on him. And
and so, I mean, I think he was had negative effects from that as much as I did. But then there's also kind of the toxic, like, entitlement kind of shit that comes with abuse. Like, because not every guy who's raised in that culture is abusive at all. It's just a matter of it can become a way to justify abusive behavior for some people. But I did allow myself to kind of believe that if I would just be the model Christian woman or mom or whatever, the Proverbs 31 woman, like, then it would work. And I tried and I tried and I tried. And we went, counselors, went to Christian counselors. And
I just want to hug your past self. Oh,
right. Yeah. And
it's not your fault.
Yeah. And at that point we had 4 kids because I had my oldest when I was 21. And then it's very different when you have kids. There's a lot more there because it would be failing them to leave.
A lot more at stake.
Yeah. And because I didn't have any context again to know what it was like, I saw my friends that grew up with parents that were divorced, but I never went through that. My parents are still happily married. And I was just, so I, like, my marriage was kind of not great. And then I was finishing my degree in psychology, my undergraduate degree. And there were so many things that I came to a point where I was like, okay, if I'm going to school for this, paying money to get this degree, and I keep hitting these things that directly contradict what I believe or have believed, why am I going to continue to go to school for this if I'm going to pretend like it's not real? So, so I had to shift that stuff a little bit. And then
it's like, if of all the things to go into, as anybody who might have any doubts in religion, psychology and philosophy are like the 2 that you should avoid.
And theology.
Huh?
And theology.
Yeah, no, my older brother actually went to religious studies, went to UCSB and got his doctorate in religious studies and became an atheist. So, that's kind of how it works. When you
study yourself out of it.
Yeah, yeah. And I actually, it was one of the things I remember, like, being like, world shaking for me when he came back and we sat down and he was like, and he, like, cushioned it very well. He was like, I kind of don't maybe believe that Jesus was actually resurrected. And part of me was like, what? You what? And I'm like, it shook me really bad, because this is my brother who I love and respect. And I know he's an intelligent guy and he doesn't think this is real. And, like, up until that point, I just didn't have any reason. So I just hit this point in my life, like my 30s about, and as a church kid growing up in the church, that you kind of have to go through a period of time when you make it your religion instead of just your parents. And they talk about that a lot. And I just don't think, I thought I had done that, but I honestly really hadn't ever. Like, I had never done the homework and looked at the theological arguments or, and so I think it was about the beginning of 2004. Yeah, 2004, I think. Yes. And I was like, for whatever reason, I just had hit a point, and I was like, I have to actually do this and look at this from an unbiased perspective. And so I tried as much as possible to read, because I'd always heard, like, that, there's, apologetics wise, I had always heard, like, there's all these things out there that would totally refute these arguments, like, and now that I like, Pascal's wager was like a big one. It's like, and I remember hearing that in youth group and being like, that makes total sense. See, checkmate right there, And so, but, like, I didn't ever really get into them. I just assumed that they were telling the truth, that there's all these people that can totally shoot down any objection. So, and I read a couple books and emergent church stuff I read, and I was like, okay, wow, that makes a lot more sense to me now than what I've been believing. And then I started looking at the apologetics side of it. And I remember, like, every time I would hit one and I would see what the answers to it were, and I was like, oh God, no, are you serious? That is it? That's how you're going to answer this question? And I was just angry that, like, this was really the only thing. And honestly, within maybe 2 or 3 months, I was done. I was done with it, because I read as much as I could about it, and I realized that there was nothing that had even didn't feel like it held any water against what there was. And I don't know if you've ever read the book, Peter Boghossian's book, Manual for Creating Atheists, which I think is like a very...
Got it on the shelf.
I feel like it's a very clickbaity name. Yeah. Because... Yeah. And I really don't have a great opinion of Peter Boghossian as a person, but the whole concept in that, because I think that came out 2015 2000. Anyway,
yeah,
right around
we had him on around that time.
Yeah, right around the time that book came out, and I remember my older brother, because he had moved back to Boise at this point, and we talked, and he like, oh, you should read this book because, and reading that and how he kind of approaches the epistemology of how we come to belief, and it being like, you can argue the details, the nuances of the historicity of Jesus and when these things, blah, blah, blah. And he said, but that's kind of a waste of time. I felt like it was saying, because because most people don't believe because of those things. They don't like look at the evidence of the Bible and the evidence that we have for Jesus's resurrection. They don't look at that. They have a personal experience, a personal spiritual experience, or they were raised in it. And then they use those as justification for their beliefs. So, which I knew that was my case. I just had always believed. And then these other things they would tell us every once in a while at church, we'd be like, oh yeah, see that totally. We're totally right. Don't need to worry about it. And so and when the way that he explained it in the street epistemology kind of idea, and it just being basically, if you can show that the way that you came to this knowledge or this area of your life is you don't subject to the same scrutiny that you do everything else, then there's a problem. And if you can't do that, then that's intellectually dishonest. And I didn't ever like feeling like I wasn't being honest with myself about, I just remember reading that book was like, that was a shift for me. It's like, I couldn't pretend that this area of my life had been compartmentalized. I had never really thought about it because most of those, and I feel like that was because I came to that belief before I really was able to didn't have critical thinking skills. I was like 5 years old when I accepted Jesus. And so that was ingrained, and that was like a given for me. And I didn't ever go through the process of saying, does this make sense on a logical level? Because it was there already. And so then when I tried to my best of my ability to do that again, from the perspective I was at now, it was like, that's why
higher education and exposure are so important, because even in high school, you don't learn critical thinking skills. That you learn to pass the test. Right. Yeah. Which is what religion teaches you. Exactly. Just do what you need to do to get past the next thing. To have had a brother to kind of guide you in that.
Yeah, it was probably very easy for me because and my little brother, like I said, he'd been kind of the black sheep of the family. He never really believed. Like, he'd kind of been within it. So were there 3 kids in the family? And all 3 of them are non-believers now? Yeah. And
does that affect your relationship with your parents?
No, not really, because, well, my parents don't go to church as much anymore. And
most parents kind of peter out once the kids are gone.
Exactly. And honestly, I think it's because my mom specifically was tired of people coming up to her at church and being like, oh, I'm praying for your kids. Like, basically saying, reminding her that her kids are going to hell. And then there's also the implication of, as a parent, especially if like all of your kids now don't believe, like, you did something wrong, and she was the children's pastor, and I think they just got burnt out. They were so involved for a long time. And I think they're similar to me in that they still enjoy the people and the community, and they have always been active in terms of like giving back, and they still do that stuff, but they just are not into the sermons.
They don't have the energy to keep up the
well, and because
the face.
And my parents are still, even though they're not in the middle, like, they are still doing, like, I felt like my parents were a very good example of people that were walking out what actually Christianity, if it was real, like, and it would be done. Like, they were always doing work with charities or giving people money or helping people out. And they weren't the ones that were standing out there protesting with signs trying to make people feel like shit. They were trying to help people. And like my dad, there's a free health clinic in Ontario that's been going since, I think, 1999 that my parents have help run. They're not the doctor part of it, but they do the administration side. And my dad's business there is a nonprofit that funds that. And I mean, so that's just who they are. They've been involved in that kind of stuff, whether it was connected to the church or not. So I think that gave me an example of you treat people.
You got a solid moral ground.
Yeah. I felt like, I didn't have a, I do feel like I probably had it easier because they'd gone through, especially with my older brother. And And I actually remember when my brother...
Oh, so he came out first?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He a couple years before.
Oh, okay.
And so... But when he told me... later, when he told me basically that he didn't believe in God anymore, and he was never pushy about it. He was never like and you guys are stupid for... He just like actually avoided the conversation because he didn't want to make things weird. He didn't want to make us feel uncomfortable. And so... But when we would talk about it, there was part of me, I remember when I realized that, he doesn't believe in God anymore. Part of me was like, watching him, because then I was like, okay, now his life's gonna fall apart, because he's married and he's been married since high school and they have a son, and I was like, all these horrible things are gonna happen because he's an atheist now, and then that didn't happen, and in most ways I feel like he became a more of a conscientious person that was actually making decisions thoughtfully and was more involved in being humanitarian kind of things, and so that didn't really line up, and so it was, and then I'm like, because and I think that's how a lot of people end up switching their ideas about people, is when you have to be continually around somebody who doesn't fit the stereotype that you've had for all this time, and so I feel like my parents, he kind of paved the way, so I just kind of was like, oh, hey, me too, I'm done. So it wasn't that hard for me, but but when I right before I got, so at the beginning of 2014, this was, and then within a couple months, I was pretty much done. It came probably about 6 months before I really admitted it to anybody. And then a couple months after that, my ex-husband and I separated again for the last time. And that was not the reason we separated. It was connected more to the abusive kind of stuff that was going on. But then that was a really convenient way for him to be like, well, that's why we got divorced, is because she became an atheist and didn't care about marriage anymore. So but that's
scapegoat it.
Right. Yeah. And
well, nobody in that situation, no man's going to say, oh yeah, I'm an abuser.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
They always justify it somehow. So they got to scapegoat it somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. And so it was, so I lost so it was a very, but I did have my family. So I feel like if I had not had my immediate family, that could have been a very different situation, because I have 4 kids, and there was a lot of adjustments that had to be made. And so that was tough. But then it was like, basically, I also had the chance to rebuild, and almost like it was good for me because I was able to start over, like kind of with who I was too, which, like you're saying, like the shift from, even like when the one time you'd see me to the next time, it's like I'm still in this place of finding myself. And because I never went through the process of what do you like, I was always like, well, I'm supposed to like this because I'm a girl and I do, So now I'm 36 years old and I'm trying to figure that out now. So
yeah, I've identified as an atheist for almost 10 years. Left religion almost 10 and a half years ago. I've had a long time to adjust to that, and most of that adjustment happened in that first, I would say, 5 years. I've been doing the show for about 5.5 years now. Most of that adjustment was all done before starting the show. You're still in that early period of who are you now? Right,
yeah. Or who am I really at all? Because when you don't have when I was growing up as a female, you have certain things that you're, especially the older I got, more like youth group time. Like I was not a kid who didn't, I like to talk. I talked and so we'd be having discussions in youth group and I would know more than the guys knew, but I started to get to a point where I realized that it was not okay for me to be answering all the questions, and especially contradicting, telling, and then they would start to have the boys would be invited to give like mini sermons, but the girls weren't. And so it started to be very apparent to me that like my personality did not line up with and what I wanted to do didn't line up with what I was supposed to be wanting to do. But I did also believe at that point, I thought, well, you get married, and because I believe, you get married and have kids, and that's how you fulfill yourself as a Christian woman. And so
because women get to have babies.
Yeah. And so I did that, and somehow I thought that magically I would become this domestic goddess, which I never did any of that kind of stuff, but I thought somehow it magically worked, but it didn't. And I still went through the guilt and feeling like that I should want to do this. I should be fulfilled by staying at home and being with my kids. I should be able to be totally okay with just cleaning the house and doing laundry and homeschooling my children. And there was a lot of guilt that went with that. And then finally, when I hit the point, it was like, when you've tried to make yourself fit something long enough and it doesn't work and you're miserable and you realize that you can keep doing this and be miserable, or you can maybe try something different. I feel like I just had to do it long enough to know it's not going to work. And I knew in my heart, like, it's when I talk to people and I'm like, I was Christian for 30 something years, and it's to me, it's so offensive for someone to be able to basically dismiss your entire life experience and be like, oh, well, you just didn't go to the right church. You weren't told the right thing. So that means all of that didn't mean anything. It was just you, or you didn't, or you just wanted to sin. Basically, it's like you just wanted to be able to have sex with people. And I'm like, yeah, that's why all of that time, all that stuff, it was totally not legit. And I didn't spend the services bawling my eyes out on the floor because I thought I was a wretched, horrible, whatever. Yeah,
it's like people choose to be gay. It's like, they chose a life of, being miserable and judged.
And I get that if somebody thinks I'm going to hell, they think I'm going to hell. I don't care about because I don't believe it's real. But if you're going to dismiss my entire life experience, and I'm telling you, like, I, had these times where I was just like, honestly, like in my car, like crying and saying, God, if you're real, I need to know, I need you to tell me. Like one time, even after I didn't believe, and it was like when things were falling apart in my marriage, and I was in the car and I'm like, okay, this is a time before where I would be praying and that would have made me feel better. And I'm like, so there was just like a last ditch thing. I was like, okay, God, if you're real, this would be a good time to show me, because I have nothing. And I sat there, and then my mom called, and that was it. And I was like, you know what, then fuck you, God, because we're done. Because, and so for somebody to tell me that I didn't really try hard enough when I know how many times those things happened, that's offensive to me. So
very,
and I think, and so I can, again, like even people that after I went through the transition and they socially, I think a lot of times people socially, it's not that they don't want to be around you, they just don't know how to relate to you anymore. When like you've always had this common set of whatever, it's just easier for them to avoid instead of, I don't think I've had anyone that was actively like, I'm not going to talk to you, except for like my ex-husband and his family. But it's just people are kind of feel awkward and they don't know. And it's like,
it's meeting a new person.
Yeah. And it's sad because it's like, I am the same person I was that you grew up with, or you saw me be a kid and now an adult. And now suddenly I'm so different because I don't believe this set of things. But
this tiny aspect of your entire life.
Yeah.
Right. Well, one of the things I've heard, and it's definitely fit with my life as well, in my own experience, is when you leave either religion, or I think it also applies for coming out as gay or bi, moving 500 miles. If you can move at least 500 miles or more, your happiness and well-being is going to be so much better.
Right. Yeah.
And there is something to getting far enough away from your past life that you're able to start fresh.
Which I feel like I've done in a lot of respects, because I live in Ontario and like Monday through Friday I have my kids. So, but then they go with their dad on the weekends, and then I come to Boise and I have like a different life here. So I've been able to do that a little bit. Because in Ontario, especially because it's so small, it's like everybody already knows you and they already have the idea of you. And if at work, like I'll have people come in that know my parents and and they just still assume that I'm totally cool with the God thing. And, and they talk, and it's so like getting away from that, even for just the time period that I can when I'm here, is a relief. Like I would have moved, but with the situation with my kids and financially and being able to have,
there's always blockades. There's always something that,
and the whole 7 degrees of separation in Malheur County, there's no more than 1 degree of separation. At a minimum, somebody that knows the person you're talking to.
Well, and especially my family has been there forever, and every time I introduce myself, they're like, "Oh, you're related to the Reckles and Vale, or you're related to." They know my dad, and so everybody knows. So I can't, which is why I'm like, I'm not going to date anybody that lives in Ontario, and I still run into people who know my family. So
man, it's been crazy at Hyde Park Street Fair. We've worked the booth, the Humanist of Idaho booth there, with somebody who lives one street or road or whatever you want to call it, 5th Avenue West. lived on 6th Avenue West. She's my mom's cousin's best friend.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what are the odds of that? Well, okay, in this area?
Yeah, a little bit higher.
Really high.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was like this is just like in the last month and a half. I'll run into people that, you know, just be like out at the bar doing karaoke or whatever, and I'm like, whatever, okay. And then I find out this person grew up in Ontario and graduated with my brother, and you know, it's like that's always happening. But this guy that I met on, you know, OkCupid or something like that, and so the first time we went out, we're talking, and like I put that I live in Boise because I'm not going to date people from Ontario, and I only date when I'm over here. So, you know, so it's not like I'm not like telling people on purpose, like lying about it, but it's just like basically, you know, I'm not.
It's just how your life is structured.
Yeah, and so we were talking about it, and he was like, I said something about living in Ontario. He's like, oh, my ex-wife and my son live there, and I was like, okay, you know. And then he said his son's name, and I was like, oh my gosh, who's your ex-wife? And he's like, he told me, and I was like, oh, okay, so his ex-wife was married to my ex-husband's brother. And I'm like, oh, why does this keep happening? It's so weird. I'm like, I don't feel like this is weird. I don't like this, you know. And like
too close.
Yeah,
too close.
Yeah. It's like you going to the people going in there like, oh, we're gonna have a baby. Like, no, you're biological twins. Shit, you know, it's
too close.
Oh yeah.
So that kind of stuff happens.
Don't ever taste. Yeah,
it gets weird in the Treasure Valley. People think of the Ozarks as being where all that kind of stuff happens. It can get kind of weird here. When I was actively dating around here, I have a cousin who I never met, who had kids, whose kids are my age, in Boise.
Could be anyone.
Yeah.
So you could end up going on a date with one of them.
That was a constant fear in my mind.
Yeah. That was like I was on Tinder, which now this is why you enable the age filter on Tinder, which I've realized. But like, so I'm, you know, flipping through, and I was like, came on this kid. He was like 18 years old, and I would not date an 18-year-old just because that would be a lot of work I would not know to deal with. But I was like, oh, that guy's
18-year-olds are stupid.
Yeah, that guy's kind of cute. And then I was like, oh, he reminds me of somebody. So on Tinder you can look at their connections. And then I realized that he was the son of one of my youth leaders that I grew up with, and I used to have a crush on his dad. And I was like, "Oh, gross!" And I posted about it on Facebook, and then his mom was like, "I bet," and his mom didn't. I didn't say his name, but his mom was like, "That was probably my son," because I just realized he was on Tinder because he just graduated, and I was like, "Yeah, that's weird." And she's like, "No, it's funny," so she wasn't upset. But I was like,
"That's good."
Yeah, I was like, engaged the
young rural boy needs to
500 miles away.
Yeah. That's hilarious.
Yeah,
so I have a quick question about your kids. How's this whole transition thing? How old is your youngest?
My youngest will be 6 in February.
6. So they've pretty much got a fully developed personality.
Yeah. For the most part, yeah.
So is there a lot of problems with religion? And
well, I think the only
you kind of have the advantage since you have them more,
right? My oldest, we went to church. We went to church with when my oldest, we would go to like Wednesdays nights. I would go to they would go to kids club is what they called it, and I would go to like the women's group or whatever. My ex-husband was not very involved. He was one of those people that's like used the religion when it was convenient for him for the most part. So I would take them though. I would take them to that, and then my next oldest is 11, and so she was also involved in it. But my younger two, by that point, we weren't really going, so it wasn't really on their radar that much. But my oldest went to youth group for a while, and she's type 1 diabetic. She was diagnosed when she was 5. She's on an insulin pump. And I remember when she was diagnosed, an evangelist lady that was there talked to me about it, and she basically told me that it could be that this was a result of unrepentant sin in my life. And I'm like, even though I believe, even though I believed at that point, there's part of me that was like, that is bullshit. Up. So I didn't accept that, but I was like, come on, man. And then, but I do remember when Lily, my oldest, started going to youth group, there was part of me, and I talked to my ex-husband, I talked to the youth pastor. I was like, I am not okay with her being involved in any of the kind of prayer services, healing services thing to where she would be praying that they're going to heal her diabetes. And one, because that would be dangerous if you actually, but two, like I was involved in those because I had anxiety. Like, went to a psychiatrist when I was in middle school. I had and on medication. My parents were always, they never were like, oh, you're going to pray that away. But I went up, I don't know how many times and got prayed for, and then it didn't work. And then how do you square that with the fact that God heals people? So it's probably your fault. Either that or why doesn't God love me enough to,
Yep.
And that fucks with their head. So I didn't want her to have any of those experiences. And I think it was just a matter of, but because my kids were never involved in we're going there all the time and we totally believe this thing, it didn't really make sense to them that much. And so when I transitioned, and I haven't told them, I've made it a point to not tell them either way. It's like they know where I stand with it. They know what I believe or don't believe. And we talk about it. I'll tell them my opinions, but I've always told them, I think you guys are smart enough to decide for yourself. And I believe information is always good. So anytime that you want to learn about any religion or talk about any of these things, then that's good. And you can have all of the information. And I believe that when I said, you don't have to decide this stuff right now. You're a kid. You don't have to.
That's awesome.
And I said, and you are smart enough to decide that. And so I don't tell them you need to go either way or whatever. When they go with their dad, and if they still go to church with their grandparents and stuff like that. But I feel like they have a direct example in their life of someone, their mom who doesn't believe this, and I'm not a shitty person. They know that, they've seen me every day, and so they have a direct something that contradicts what they're being told.
She may be embarrassing as all hell, but
Right.
she's not shady.
Yeah, and when they see okay, but actually my mom is nicer a lot of the time than these people are. So how does this, So I think it's a good thing that they've come to me and said yeah, this doesn't make any sense, Mom. Why would God do? My 11-year-old is very a thinker. She gets into existential places. She's goes into existential stuff. And I'm I didn't think about that kind of thing till 2 years ago. This is
sometimes an apple is just an apple.
Right. Yeah. But she's it wouldn't make any sense. Why would God, if God was a loving God, why would he make somebody with gay and then tell them they couldn't be that way? That's kind of cruel. And I'm yep, exactly. And so these things that I feel if they're not told they have to believe something, they'll figure it out.
They figure out.
And so I think with my kids, I really don't, I did have a situation where my 7-year-old daughter came home and was, right when Trump was elected, but before he was in office. Oh, yeah. And she was like, man, Mom, I'm really glad that the Trump got elected. And I'm oh, I knew where this came from her grandparents. And I was oh yeah, why is that? She's because the one who's president now does not love Jesus and he wants to kill the babies. And I was not so much. Trying not to be no, that's a bunch of bullshit. I was no, not everybody thinks that he's, and I said, I kind of think Donald Trump's an asshole. And she was And then she was no, I think he's an asshole too. I'm you don't have to care about this. How about you just don't think about it,
I hate saying this, but Obama's actually a Christian. Trump isn't.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. He's, yeah.
And realistically, Trump has probably pressured a lot of women into having abortions after having affairs with him.
Right. Well, I think I don't know how people.
It's just parroting grandparents. That's.
It is. And that's like I was saying, when I said something about I think he's an asshole, then she was kind of oh, I do too. And it's that's
they're
her
just
age.
Trying to find.
She's trying to be oh, this is what I need to be, And that's why I usually tell them, you don't have to figure this stuff out now. But my 11-year-old one time came home from visiting and she was upset. She had just turned 11 and she was upset because she said her grandma had come to her and said you're 11 years old now, and that's the time that I decided that I was going to believe in God, and basically was saying you need to make the decision right now. And
I thought that was such a weird thing.
Yeah. One that we don't trust them to do anything, make any real big decisions. But now you're 5 and you can decide
right?
Yeah. But it was like, and Katie, my daughter was like, I don't really want, because I have told her, you don't have to decide this now. You're a kid. You don't have to think about that stuff. So she was trying to say that, but I can understand.
How do you say that to your grandma?
Right.
Though?
But yeah, exactly. And I can understand from their perspective, it's like a life. It's very important that you make that decision so you don't go to hell. So I get on one hand why they would be pushy about it, but it's not okay. And so basically my daughter was upset because she was like, well, she was trying to make me make a decision and I didn't want to. And I didn't want to tell her that I just don't believe it because you don't want to disappoint your grandparents. And it's like, so I feel like they don't get any pressure. I try to make sure they don't get any pressure from me to believe.
So it's like, well, unfortunately, that's just one of those really harsh life lessons where this is going to continue your whole life. This is just the first time you've had to deal with not hurting somebody that you care about, but standing up for yourself.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, you're too young for it.
Right. And I feel like they've seen the transition that I've gone through in the last couple of years, just in how much more confident and okay with myself I am and happy I am. So I feel like for anyone to tell them that, like, there's no doubt in their mind that it's that, and even them, they're in a better place emotionally as opposed to the last couple of years of the marriage where it was just all tension and chaos and emotional stuff going on. They can see that. Even the younger ones who they don't necessarily know it, cognitively, they know that emotionally everybody's in a better place. And so I think on that level, there's not questions. And I don't really worry about. I think they'll figure it out.
Well, it sounds like you got some sharp kids.
Yeah, I do. They're pretty smart. I'm glad because my 14-year-old, I see her being able to. When I was her age, I would let guys talk me into doing things just because I was like, I don't want to piss him off because I want him to like me. And it's like, you have that. And she's more like, you know what? I'm not going to deal with that. Step off. Like if a guy is texting with her and he's like, why didn't you text me back? She's like, because I didn't want to, and so which makes me feel good because it's like, I didn't have that ability because of whatever. I mean, that could be a personality thing, but I think she's seen what happens when you don't stand up for yourself and you don't have boundaries and you're not assertive. She's seen that. And so now she's, like one time she told me a little while ago, she was like, yeah, Mom, I figured out pretty early that you and Dad didn't know what you were doing and that most people don't. And I was like, well, that's good because I didn't figure that out till a couple years ago that,
It's like, well, high five, kid. All right.
I was like, yes. So
you are absolutely correct. Right. Nobody knows what they're doing.
Yeah. And you never figure it out. So I'm glad that they know that.
But she's going to Ontario High School, right? Yeah,
she's a freshman.
Which, when my niece was on Fruitland basketball team, they played against Ontario a lot. And there was a openly trans girl on the Ontario girls basketball team.
Yeah.
Nobody cared.
Yeah, no.
Literally nobody, at least none of the kids, cared at all.
Yeah, Lily was telling me she's in drama club and there's a trans boy and he's totally open about it, talks to her about it, talks about the process. That would never, ever have happened when I was a kid. Like, I don't even remember. One of my older brother's best friends is gay, and he did not come out until he left and went to college and was out of Ontario. No, but he didn't come out till then. I didn't know anybody who would have identified. Yeah, I didn't know anybody who would have identified as homosexual or even atheist when growing up. So it's so different now.
Yeah, our generation, it turns out, is the weird transitional life form. It's
We're the
kids,
blob that crawled out of the sea.
The baby boomers are mostly terrible monsters, and the kids now are amazing human beings that are, as long as they don't lose that, the future of our species is good.
I think if you have a strong humanist base, whatever happens after that is probably just fine.
Well, and it's like, I know there's a term for it, but it's, having the non-internet childhood and then getting the internet, which I know there's a word for it, but
millennial.
Like, or like
that's kind of how we view,
or like the Nintendo generation.
Nintendo generation.
I think Gary was one who said that once. I was like, that works.
mid 80s.
Yeah. So we got the internet in 1996. And so I had in my high school we had internet, dial-up internet, and MIRC chat, but, it was all.
Yeah, good stuff.
and so, but, and I feel like, I think when there's problems in schools with those kind of things, it's the parents creating the problems. The kids are really, they don't care about that.
Every teacher will tell you that.
Yeah, and I had to go in.
And I have to trust the teachers.
I had to go in for a dress code violation. My daughter, it was ridiculous because if I showed you a picture, she looked like a legal secretary from Mad Men. It was so like nothing sexual at all about the outfit she was wearing, but she went in and whoever it was doing the measuring of the length from the whatever. They were like, oh, that's too far above your knee. And my daughter is like one of the kids who like tries to do everything right. And so for her, this was like a
devastating.
Yeah, she came home crying. She couldn't go back to school.
Complete existential crisis.
Yeah. And I was like, are you freaking kidding me? So then I went and met with the principal, and actually the principal is someone that I grew up with. So knowing her, I knew that she was not going to be unreasonable about it. She was not the one who did the measuring or whatever. And so we talked about it, and she said they can't like say, oh, that was totally wrong because they have to support their staff. But she said, yeah, this is a case where this was not applied in the way it's supposed to be applied. So, and we ended up talking about that they have some trans students, and that it's cultural because Oregon is a little more progressive. That they there's all these protections, and basically she said the only time she has problems is when parents come in and they're like, I don't want my kids being in a dressing room with the blah 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 blah, because that it's the parents that cause the problems. The kids are cool with it; they don't have a problem. And I think like before, it's like when that generation dies out, it's going to be so much easier for everybody. Or dies out, or is not like the ones controlling everything, I guess. But yeah,
I'd love to be that optimistic, but.
We have a friend.
I don't have harsh feelings towards baby boomers generally, but
we have a friend with a daughter who's just really skinny, and she got in trouble. Dress code first day of the school year, I think it was last year, because clothes don't fit her.
She was wearing like a fishnet thing underneath and a shoulder sweater, which covered everything. Yeah, but. Because she showed her collarbone. Because she's freaking 80 pounds. Yeah. There's no way to not show your collarbone.
Right. Oh, I highly doubt was even 80 pounds at that point. Yeah. It's just so thin that, okay, the choice is, do you show midriff or do you show collarbone? Well, there's no choice in between.
I was saying, it's kind of like, having the whole, like, it can't be this far above the knee. It's like, you're kind of like discriminating against people with long limbs. Like, so you have to slouch or whatever. No, which is why I kind of enjoy going to the high school now and dressing the way that I dress, because I'm like, I can do what I want. Because when I was in high school, I wouldn't have ever done it. What are you
gonna do? Write me up?
Right. And it's the same high school, the same, like I went into the bathroom, it's the same freaking bathroom. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is weird. But yeah. So.
All right. Well, we are running out of time. Do you have any last words?
Nope.
All right. Well, Kylie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for letting me come on.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your rather upbeat story.
Yeah.
and hopefully this will be encouraging for anyone who is listening and is stuck in a small town, because it's especially scary leaving religion in a small town, and you've survived.
I think that for me, the realization is that there is a community of people out there that you will be accepted in, and you will find kind of your new tribe, and it's scary and it takes a while, but when you do, it's like you will find people that you have this if not a stronger connection with, because these people like you and accept you for who you are, not just because you believe the same things, and that to me has been amazing, to finally find people that I know, like I don't have to pretend to believe something or be something. They like me, and that's possible, but I didn't realize that until I had to go through the process. So I think that's, hopefully people can get that from the whole thing. So yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And for our listeners, remember, not all those who wander are lost. Thank you for listening to another episode of Atheist Nomads. You can find show notes and contact information at atheistnomads.com. Follow us on Twitter at Atheist Nomads, and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/atheistnomads. Please subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, or your podcatcher of choice. And while you're there, feel free to leave us a review. Theme music is courtesy of Sturdy Fred. Until next time, this has been the Atheist Nomads.